Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning or wherever you're from. If you'd like to share in the chat where you're joining us from, that would be lovely. And we'll just start in a moment or two, just wait for everybody to join today. So my name is Victoria Coleman. Welcome. I'm the Executive Director of the Foundation for Developing Compassion and Wisdom. And today's session is going to last for 60 minutes. I'll just share with you how we've structured the session today. First, I'm going to say a few words about FDCW, our organisation, and what it is that's inspired our webinar today. Then I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then we're going to dive in. And at the end, we'll have some time for some questions and answers from the audience. FDCW's patron is His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And he has said that the key to a happier and more successful world is the growth of compassion. We don't need to become more religious, nor do we believe in an ideology. All that's necessary is for each of us to develop our good human qualities. FDCW is a non-profit dedicated to a kinder, wiser, and more compassionate world. We offer educational resources for adults and children for a happier and more meaningful life. Our resources offer practical ways to examine our values, understand our minds better, and to develop a sense of concern for the well-being of others. We aim to break through self-limiting beliefs, abandon destructive patterns of behavior and thinking, build better relationships with ourselves and others, and cultivate resilience for the times we are now living in. If you'd like to learn more about our work and the impact of it around the world, please do have a look at our annual review, which is available online on our website. We've also just launched a new resource called Conversations That Matter, which is free and downloadable from our website. This resource is designed to get people talking about what their values are and what's important for them in their life. Some of you may have joined our online Compassion, Wisdom and Action conference during November last year. And at that conference, our president, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, gave us a very inspiring talk about compassion and kindness. We felt inspired by his advice to explore how we can put compassion into practice in our daily lives. So we came up with an idea of 6 webinars throughout the year, and each webinar examines compassion from a different perspective. So today's webinar is on the topic of work with compassion, and our speakers are going to share strategies and their experience of how we can bring more compassion into our workplaces. I'm delighted to introduce our speakers. They are Martin Strom and Jane Lewis. Martin is the founder of Yeshi Norbu Mind Training Center and of Potential Project Sweden. He has a background as a serial entrepreneur in information technology, and he holds a master's degree in computer science. However, after discovering the power of meditation 20 years ago, he changed direction and got a master's degree in psychology. And then he began to study Buddhist philosophy and psychology since then. Armed with these skills, he spent the past decade in leadership and organizational consultancy. He is also a keynote speaker to help foster more mindfulness, selflessness, and compassion in companies using the power of mind training. Martin's also the co-author of 3 books titled I'm Sorry You Were Saying, The Mind of the Leader, and Fokus på jobbet, which means focus on the job, and is published in Swedish. Martin is also a trustee on the board for FDCW and has been for the past 3 years. Welcome to Martin. Jane Lewis has a background in applied psychology, and she has 20 years experience in training in understanding self and others and critical thinking for inclusion. She spent 7 years as the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission and started her decade-long collaboration with Aboriginal academic Professor Yin Paradise. She designs anti-racism training for workplaces. Her anti-racism work has always primed positive social norms and she uses the 16 guidelines, which is a program developed by FDCW. She's also accredited by FDCW to deliver these workshops, specifically and explicitly exploring secular ethics using the 16 guidelines, which allows us all to develop compassion and wisdom. So each of our speakers will share some thoughts on compassion in the workplace, and then we'll move to the question and answer and discussions on the various themes. So if I could welcome you both, Jane and Martin, thank you so much for being with us today. Martin, maybe I could talk to you first. Can you just share some initial thoughts about how we can bring more compassion to the workplace and how you've seen that happen over the years?
Yeah, so like you mentioned in your introduction, I have basically three perspectives on compassion in the workplace, and they come from different roles that I have myself. And one is that I'm the CEO of a software development company, and as a leader myself, I really value compassion as the bedrock for creating healthy organization and well-functioning teams. And then the other perspective I have is that I worked for over a decade as a management consultant, but using tools like mindfulness training and compassion training with leaders and staff and companies like IKEA, Accenture, McKinsey, many others. And then the third perspective I have is that I'm also a psychologist. So I work with people individually in therapy, and a lot of my clients are suffering from stress and anxiety and depression that is related to a workplace context. So the first aspect that I wanted to touch on is actually self-compassion. So this would be the first application of compassion in the workplace for me. And I meet so many people who are extremely hard on themselves. They place completely unrealistic demands on themselves. They feel like they're never good enough, like they should always deliver faster and better and more and harder. And when they push themselves harder and harder, many times they just end up in burnout and all of that terrible stuff. So self-compassion, it means treating yourself like you would treat a very dear friend. So if a friend came to you with their struggles and their concerns, work-related challenges, whatever their sufferings, you would treat them, that good friend, with empathy and kindness and patience. But then suddenly when we relate to ourselves, all that goes out the window. So instead, we're often very harsh on ourselves. The inner dialogue would be, you're such a failure, you never get anything right. Everyone will see that you're not up to the task, all these things. And you might be aware of the imposter syndrome, where people walk around feeling that they're not good enough to be in the role that they're in, and so on and so forth. And so these are the things that we say to ourselves, and those are things we would never say to a dear friend. And at work, we focus so much on, it's about having the right skills, the right knowledge, and performance that comes from constantly just pushing ourselves harder. So self-compassion means being our own best friend, being really kind to ourselves, appreciating the hard work we put in, and being very, very patient and kind to ourselves when we fail or when we come up short, which we inevitably will do. Instead of beating ourselves up, we really need to be kind and caring and compassionate towards ourselves. And that, as it turns out, is actually the best path to, really stellar performance, but a performance that's born out of a sense of ease and joy and creativity, because we give ourselves that space. So that's one thing, self-compassion. And then the other thing I wanted to touch upon is more from the perspective of leadership, and the need for leaders to really emphasize and trust in compassion. So there is this old and stubborn misunderstanding among leaders that you need to be tough. there's this, up or out mentality. People need to be controlled and pushed, and the only thing compassion and kindness would get you would be lazy people that take advantage of you and underperform. So it's so many leaders don't even think that compassion is an option as a leadership style. But there's so much research coming out now that shows that, in fact, the opposite is true. So leaders who really embody a very compassionate leadership style, they foster environments and teams that perform better. So if people are treated with kindness, if they feel that their leaders actually see them as human beings and understand their sufferings and their challenges, then they can reach their full potential. And I could say just also that the definition of compassion would be, actually seeing someone's struggles and suffering and wanting to alleviate them, wanting to help that person. And of course, as a leader, we sometimes have to make really hard decisions. Sometimes we have to do things that are difficult, like letting someone go or giving difficult feedback. So compassion always needs to be coupled with wisdom. As a leader, we need to understand the business and be intelligent about what needs to be done. But even while we're doing really hard things as a leader, we can still do them with compassion. So if we back off from doing the difficult things because we don't want to hurt someone's feelings, or that's actually not kind, it's not compassionate. It can turn in what's sometimes called idiot compassion. So compassion is about really caring for people, really making an effort to place kindness at the center of everything we do as leaders. But even then, if we have to make difficult decisions and tell people difficult things, we can still maintain our care and concern for others. We can still make kindness and compassion our top priority, even though sometimes we have to do hard things. And then to wrap this up, of course, leaders have to practice self-compassion as well. So if a leader is really hard on themselves, which is often the case, if they have this critical, mean inner voice, of course, that's how they're going to treat others as well. So everyone needs to start by practicing self-compassion. And when they cultivate that deeper and deeper, then there's also something that can be extended to others. And then we really need to start trusting compassion on all levels of an organization. I don't have time to go into it here, but there is so much research showing that makes organizations perform better. It makes them more productive, but most importantly, it creates an atmosphere at work where people can thrive, where they can feel safe and connected, where they can contribute from a place of curiosity and interest and creativity, and where people are allowed and able to be truly kind and caring towards each other. So that's and I can just say that's the kind of place I would like to work in. So that's probably true for everyone else as well.
Thank you. I can resonate with a lot of what you're saying, and I think you described it really, really well. I have a few questions, but I'd love to bring in Jane now as well, because Jane, are you thinking the same thing? Do you feel that leaders are embracing compassion, or do you think they still think of it as a bit fuzzy and not really a viable path to take?
Oh, great question, and greetings from the land of the Kulin Nations here. I'm paying my respects to elders past, present and future, and to any First Nations people attending now or in the future. But great question. Look, after 25 years of consulting, what I'm finally seeing more of is leaders who understand what Martin was talking about, the business as well as the social benefits of compassion. Now, for 10 years, all my work has been in a particular application of compassion, which is anti-racism. And what I'm going to do now is invite you to watch a 4-minute summary of my longer white supremacy 101 videos, but have a listen at the end to what the American general manager of an international corporation says, actually at the end of a Q&A session that we ran. And can I just warn you that the content of this video is designed to invoke discomfort and some compassion for all of us who are duped by the lie of racism. So Angela, if you'd like to give us a press about this, and have a listen to the GM at the end.
We need to work together with a range of points of view to serve a new world, to save life on Earth. But racism is designed to divide us. Let's start by admitting that racism is a touchy subject. I'm not here to raise feelings of guilt. Starting just 300 years ago, enlightened white men sought to rationalize and justify their ongoing colonial looting and atrocities. They invented the myth of a few distinct races of humans around the world. They stole and measured skulls from colonial genocides and concluded scientifically that the white race was the most highly evolved and must bring civilization to those yellow, red, or black races of savages and nomads. Britain invaded more countries more recently than any other. They didn't always win, but they tried, everywhere pink on this map. We've breathed in the myth of white superiority ever since. Propaganda divides the poor and stops them from struggling together for economic justice. White people have been conditioned to feel the same disgust and contempt for non-white people as we have for cockroaches. The emotional power of racism is immense. We may not think we're racist, but we are all thoroughly racialized to believe the myth of white superiority. White dominance is the air we share. Only whites can breathe easy.
Do any of the dolls look like they're not Australian? Both of them? Okay.
That one. This one and this one.
No matter how hard racist scientists continue to look, there are no genetic markers of difference that separate humanity into races. DNA variations within races have proved to be much greater than those between races.
This is important work we're doing, and I'm learning. The more we engage, the more I'm learning. And you know what you're talking about again was this is beyond racism. We're focused on racism, but this is beyond racism. And so just repeat what you wrote. You know, if we can create a culture of care, respect, humility, generosity, and wisdom within our organization, that impact on us as individuals, and on our business, and on our community will be extraordinary. We are not there. I know we are not even remotely close to being there. But we have a destination we're trying to get to. And today you helped us get a little bit closer. And for that, I'm very grateful. So thank you.
We can see he's serious about this, and more are joining him. So the research that Martin is talking about is everywhere. The people are serious about business results. They have to be serious about treating customers and internal staff with respect and compassion, and that's why we're all here today, to learn about that. So thank you very much for your question.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that. So Martin, when you talk about self-compassion, can you share a little bit about how that works? In other words, is it like a muscle? In other words, when you start doing it, does it get easier? So, for example, this morning I was sort of sitting, having a reflective moment and thinking, oh, I've got to chair this webinar and I'm really nervous about it, and maybe I won't be any good at it, and I'm going to make all these mistakes, and people are going to look at me and think, oh, she's terrible. And then I think, hang on, let's just try and send some love to myself, try and send some kindness to myself. And it actually worked, so can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, we are creatures of habit, or we're the product of our own habits, and the inner dialogue, and also the way we react emotionally to things. Those are also habits that they're shaped in childhood. The way our parents, for example, might all parents want their kids to perform well, so sometimes they will scold a child that doesn't perform and speak to them in a way that's not maybe kind and supportive, and then we internalize those things, and then we live in this very competitive society, and all of that means that we've internalized these ways of treating ourselves that are not very helpful. But it's all just old habits, and any habit can be changed through there are two things that are needed. The first one is awareness. So we have to become aware of what, how am I treating myself? What is my relationship to myself? What am I saying internally? So we need awareness. But then the other aspect is to start to act differently. So, for example, in your case, now you have this experience of becoming aware of what you're saying to yourself, and then instead implementing a bit of kindness. You can actually in that situation, you can even just put your own hand on your heart and say, okay, dear, I'm here for you, it's okay, relax, and just that gesture will create new habits, and then we reprogram the neural pathways in our brains to be naturally more kind and caring towards ourselves and others. So yes, it can all be, these are skills that can be cultivated. That's what's so cool about it. These are habits that we can train and change the old habits that were not so beneficial.
Like a muscle that can get a bit stronger when you start using it.
Yeah, exactly like that. I mean, just, you go to the gym and you do your exercises and you create new muscle fiber. But in this case, this is your mental gym where you create new neural pathways and train that muscle, which is your brain. So there's a perfect analogy, really.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me, I was listening to a talk by Paula Chichester, who's been a meditator for many, many years. And she said when she was in a retreat, the self-critic came up, and she was listening to this critic all the time, and realized actually, if she just listens to this, she's not really going to make any shift or heal. But if she actually, loves herself, sends kindness to herself, then healing can begin. And, it really made sense to me. And it was interesting. She'd find that out in years of retreat. And I think it's more and more needed now, as you've explained. Can I bring in Jane again? Can we talk a little bit, Jane, about when disharmonies arise? I mean, how could compassion, or how does compassion fit into that if you get into disputes, office gossip, disagreements, different points of view? How have you seen that working?
Oh, look, gossip is such a classic one, isn't it? I find that in all my work, of course, a lot of it is anti-racism, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But when it comes to gossip, I think the thing is that when in anti-racism, really important themes are mindfulness and compassion. And when when people get training on how to be more emotionally aware, what happens is that we can self-diagnose those painful states that actually lead us to blame others and lash out with sarcasm and stories, and that means we can learn not to identify with them, not to kind of believe the stories, and locate it instead in our body and know that it'll pass. And so with practice, we can actually refrain then from those habitual harmful responses that I was hearing Martin talk about before I dropped out entirely with an internet failure. So, but also we're mindful enough to apologize if we get it wrong, and if we slip up, we can apologize and mean it. And that's a whole different level of relating. And then with some self-awareness, then we can gently correct others' habits too. And, there's no point in angrily calling someone out, whether it's a racist joke or whether it's a nasty bit of gossip. No one learns anything when they're humiliated, but instead seeing the best in the person, reminding them of their usual kindness, reassuring them that it wasn't their intention to say something so harmful, taking people off, let's have a cup of tea, have a gentle chat once settled. These are the ways that we can make change, one mind at a time. But truly in colonies like I live in, and and throughout and all wherever Europe colonized the world, and in Europe itself, that one of the biggest problems of disharmony between people is racism, is the fact that what Caucasian people, white people, are holding on to all of the positions of power and influence, and they can't even see the way that they're reproducing the racist habits, the racist norms. So my job has been to gently wake them up, and the metaphor that I use is the various levels of a toxic atmosphere. There's the invisible stratosphere of multi-generational racism, the clouds of racism that pervade society and organizations and interpersonal relations, which is where all the attention is addressed with racism. It's just the symptom, it's not the cause. And then the underground poison of internalized racism. And so again, at the risk of being a broken record, I'm going to invite you to watch another bit of a video. Listen closely to some of my associates as we explore those levels. First the issues, then the solutions. By the way, Martin is one of my stars, but I've edited him out because he's right here, and you're hearing him tonight. So, but this one is 7 minutes long because it starts at multi-generational, goes down to internalized, and then up again with the solutions. So, the last one had some hesitation in it. I'm hoping that this syncs nicely. So fingers crossed for the internet connections for everyone. But I hope you enjoy it. And if you wouldn't mind muting yourselves, that really helps with the audio for everyone. So see you in 7 minutes. See what you think of this.
I'm often asked to talk about my experience of racism, but what I've always wanted to say to those people that ask me about my experience, regardless of their intention or goodwill, is learn your own history. Look at your history, look at your experience, look at where you've come from. That will tell you about my experience.
We live in a settler colony, right? We cannot escape that fact. And what that means is that all the systems, all the structures that define the way we all live in this country continue to be dominated by a small, narrow very monochromatic cultural group.
Sometimes we see that workplaces can say, oh, you know, we're race neutral. So BAU, business as usual, for an example. Now, this might seem relatively innocuous, but actually BAU is a silencing. It's a not acknowledging that race exists, that, you know, the disparities exist and people have different experiences in a workplace. So that also sends a message that it's not important, that it's unseen. It's dismissed, it's silenced. So I think that's an important thing to notice, that if we don't have policies, if we don't have practices, if we don't have conversations that acknowledge that race exists and the way that these categories have existed, or that people have different experiences of their workplace or of their work or of their lives at home that then enter the workplace, if we're not acknowledging that, then we're reproducing and reinforcing the silence, which maintains the system and maintains the privilege.
Not being accepted every day, it can get to you. It can definitely get to you, because it's something that slowly breaks down your mindset, where you're constantly thinking, why? You know, what did I do to you? Just a normal human being like you are. You know, we think the same. You know, we have similarities. We talk. You know, we all do similar things. Like, why don't you like me? Like, because of the skin of my color? It's crazy. You know, I will never understand that mindset. But for me, I ignore people like that, man. I think it's too draining to even think about it.
Whatever colour you come from or whatever mob you come from, I guess not letting those comments get to you, so that you're not, I guess in a sense, oppressing yourself. And this is what creates such big identity crisis, because you're internalising all of it and not being able to accept who you are because of what people are saying about you, and listening to those rather than listening to yourself and finding that connection for yourself.
Accepting that, and this is a lifelong process, always imperfect, that what it takes really to be anti-racist is not simply about being non-racist. So Ibram Kendi's written the book How to be Anti-Racist, and his whole point is non-racism doesn't exist. Non-racism is racism, yeah? So you're either racist or you're anti-racist. And so what anti-racism requires is this ongoing inward reflection, self-criticism, that persisting awareness building of your own blind spots and where you fall short. And that sort of takes vulnerability, courage, compassion as well, because it's very hard to beat yourself up and then be ashamed of that, and actually just embracing that.
In all truth, we all are the same. We're made up of muscle, bones, tissue, fats, like we're all the same. So white people should practice anti-racism also because they are the source. And that sounds harsh, it sounds like something that is mean, I guess, but it needs to be accepted and it needs to be acknowledged, because racism did come from somewhere and it is embedded in everybody. So I think that if white people if they take a stand and start practicing anti-racism, then it shows to a lot of other people who may have racism embedded in them since they were little and have stereotypes that they've built up. It kind of is a wake-up call to everybody. If someone who is white and is not a person of colour can do it, then you can too.
I think anti-racism strategies or anti-racism initiatives are about, okay, what can we do with this business? Or what can we do with this community or this space to actually prevent racism before it happens? So for example, you know, making it really clear to staff, to students, to members of the community that this is what the expectations are and this is what will happen if people break those rules or guidelines that are focused on equal opportunity and also tackling discrimination of the racial kind or other kinds.
To say that it is racism, when someone experiences it, just trust them. Because there's no benefit to saying something's racist. There's no upside to declaring racism. There's only ever a downside for the victim. You just have to trust them when they say they're experiencing it.
In a perfect world, we would all be sitting down and having a good yarn up with a cup of tea and just, understanding each other, where we come from and all of that. That would be nice, wouldn't it, though?
So what I've found is that showing these, having people listening and reflecting, then allows for really open conversations between staff. People realise we've all been exposed to the same poison, for profit, different impacts, different responsibilities, but at last we can talk about the issues together, and often it's for the very first time. So gentle ways to have conversations that can make people feel safe to broach really touchy subjects, whether it's about work, whether it's about racism, whether it's about performance, whether it's about the difficult financial circumstances in which a business finds itself. The ability to relate to each other as fellow human beings is so vital.
And are you in agreement with Martin that self-compassion can play a role with that?
Oh, it's absolutely vital. You have to know yourself first. And so, as a first step, I love what Dimple says. The first step about understanding our role in society is to learn our own history, but to do that with self-compassion, because for sure, if we've got white skin, for example, in the context of racism, there's an ugly story. Our ancestors have been up to no good, and we've got to face that. It's the internalized biases, my lack of self-compassion, and the way that that's acted out in the world, and the way that the lack of respect for anybody else that was different. That's the cause of the way that the world is now. And as I'm just going to sort of summarize what Martin says in one of the videos, is that, of course, the answers to the way that the world is now, where we're destroying ourselves and destroying Mother Earth, are much more likely to come from Indigenous cultures. But the racist point of view, by nature, ignores them, dismisses anything that comes from Indigenous societies. So we've got a lot of listening to do from that point of view of being fellow human beings. We've got any hope of saving our species, and let alone all the other ones we've already destroyed. Huge.
Can I open it up now to our audience? Do people have any comments or questions for our speakers on what we've been discussing and sharing so far? Does anybody want to jump in with something that our speakers can respond to or expand on? Please perhaps raise your hand using in Zoom. Andrea, can you help me out? Has anybody raised their hand? Is anybody wanting to contribute something?
Please
Can you
use
see anybody on?
the raise hand function on Zoom, so that you come up to the top of the screen and I can see you easily, or you can speak. Yeah.
I can see Ross Finlay. There she is.
Okay.
Hi.
Go Ross.
Thank you
Go,
so
Ross.
much. Thank you both of you so much. Really, really, really helpful. My question was, do you have thoughts of strategies for approaching someone whose habit for power or fear of vulnerability is fairly entrenched? I recently had a conversation with well, now an ex-boss, she sacked us all. We were mediators and she sacked us all. She clearly needed to be in control in that very, very tight kind of way. And I remember she invited us, having sacked us, if anybody would like to talk to her. And I said, yes, please, I would. And I finished with her by saying, you know, Ruth, it would be kind if, you know, you would say a little bit more about why you've done this, because that would help people's healing process. And she couldn't respond. She was so shocked. And I don't think anything, I think she's so resisted, she's so defended. And that's my interest, is how you, and maybe it's just time, cups of tea and endless cups of tea. But if people say, I don't like tea, no, I don't want to have tea with you, then where do you go with that, really? So thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can have a stab at that. So I think, first of all, one general rule that I, you know, try to teach people when they find themselves in situations that cause a lot of suffering or distress or are difficult is, you know, first of all, you need to figure out if, you know, is there a reasonable change for me to change this situation, or in this case, this person? And, you know, if not, then there are only two options, and one is acceptance. So accepting the difficult situation, or in this case, the difficult person, or leaving the situation. So so first of all, you need to figure out, is it likely that you will be able to affect this person? And if it's, you know, if you have a really horrible boss, then oftentimes you're in a situation where, you know, they're just going to keep on playing their power games, and you might have extremely limited chances of ever changing them, ever reaching them. So then you're in a situation where you either have to accept the shitty boss or get out. So that's just something I found generally helpful myself. You know, pick your battles, kind of thing. But then maybe, you know, it's a colleague, or it's someone that, you know, you have a reasonable chance of affecting, and then the way of doing that will always be, you know, treating them with kindness. I find that if it's appropriate and you have that rapport, then humor is very good. You know, it's like gently poking fun of someone who's being ridiculously protective or ridiculously manipulative, and, you know, and also, you know, being very, you know, I wouldn't say self-deprecating, but just, you know, showing that you can make fun of yourself, and, you know, there's nothing threatening or dangerous going on here. And then if you can create that rapport and connection, then maybe you can give some gentle advice, maybe, or if not, all you can ever do is show the best example towards them, and maybe, you know, something will soften eventually. But a lot of times there's nothing you can do to change other people. You just have to love them and accept them, or stay the hell away from them, you know. I don't know. Yeah, that was helpful.
So thank you. Yes, I entirely agree. I was thinking, when you were talking about the advice that the Buddha gave when you're choosing a guru, to take 10 years. Don't just jump in with anybody, you know, really find out about them. Don't just trust them on the front, just really, yeah. So it's that a bit too, I think. Thank you.
It is, and if I might add, Ros, that the Buddha's advice is about chesting gold. You know, you rub it and do whatever physical things you do with people. It's about asking gentle questions and listening really closely to what they say, and then picking particular words that you can say, oh, when you say that, when you say difficulties, what are they? What are the ones that stand out to you most? Keep exploring what they say, because simply being fascinated in what someone is saying and thinking about your questions and developing them, that makes people connect with you, and then there's much more hope of making a suggestion, because you are using their own words to frame a suggestion back to them but after a lot of listening. Just some suggestions. Thanks, Ros, for your question. Wonderful.
Thanks, Ros. Can I turn to Alice now? I think she has her hand up for a question. Alice, can you unmute?
So a question for Martin. Hi, Martin. More recently, there's been focus on nonviolent communication in workplaces and other places, and this training is available. My question is to make the changes in communication to become kinder, more patient, and so on. How often does that training need to be repeated? Because we know that you can do the exercises on the day, and it's, illuminating. It's just wonderful when you see what changes can be made. But once isn't enough. So how do you reinforce that kind of change in communication in a workplace?
Yeah, I've been asking myself that for about 15 years. Because when you do these kind of trainings in workplaces, then everyone, the reaction you get is that, this is wonderful, and maybe you might teach someone mindfulness, and they go ahead and they practice that for a while, and they find such benefit, and or compassionate communication, NVC, and so on. So everyone, they really appreciate it, and they can see that this has a positive impact on me, and then they just stop. It just gets buried in the busyness of everyday life. So the thing that's so hard is to, first of all, convey to people that this is not knowledge that you just intellectually has to put in your brain, and that's will solve things. It's a practice. It's like jogging. I can teach you about jogging, and you can know about it intellectually, but until you actually get out and run every day or 3 times per week or whatever, it's not going to have any impact. And it's the same with these kind of trainings. So you need to inspire people to show that they're meaningful, but then you also have to convey that it is a type of practice, and then you have to somehow support them in creating new habits, which is so hard. So I guess what I'm saying is that I have no idea how to really get everyone to work, consistently and persistently at these things. There's a few people who immediately will pick it up and run with it, but yeah, I guess you just have to keep repeating the same message over and over again, and hopefully people will start forming new habits around it. But yeah, we all know how difficult it is to create new habits. So yeah, not an easy one.
Can I bring in a slightly different theme now, which is about remote working? So, of course, over the last few years, we've had to get used to working online, working on Zoom. Can you say, Jane, can you say a little bit about how we can be more compassionate, and how that can play a role when we're working online? Because myself, I find it utterly exhausting, and being focused just looking that way. All the other auditory and communication tools are taken away from you. So is there something you can say around that could be illuminating for us? Thanks.
Oh, gee, I'm not sure that my comments will be entirely helpful. What the people that I've spoken to, many people of colour that I've spoken to over COVID have been so relieved by remote working, because all of the usual microaggressions and the hard looks, the dismissal, the excluding questions, all of that stuff, it doesn't really happen in a Zoom meeting. And so it's been a huge relief for them, and there's much less chance of being targeted and sort of diminished when you're online and away from the office. But I know that compassion is certainly going to be needed as people return to work, because we risk this two-tier situation, a hierarchy almost, between the people who are back in the office and those who preferred to stay at home. And this is a big focus of HR departments at the moment. And yet maybe I'm living in la la land, but I do feel as if COVID has trained us a little bit to understand our shared vulnerability a bit, and, you know, male or female, parent or not, or high status or low, we've all been at risk and all had our freedoms curtailed. And there's an opportunity to practice patience and generosity that's not often seen in neoliberal economies. But I guess online there are some simple rules, like keep your video on as much as possible. Be there. Do you do the classic listening behaviours that work face-to-face? Work to a certain degree. You can't do eye contact because, you know, we're scouring the screen, looking at people, and people are moving all the time. But the attention, the leaning forward, the being there, all of that is a sign of compassion and a sign of giving attention, to be contributing, to chat, to engage in whatever way you can, in a way that suits your communication style, is an act of great compassion to everyone else who's in the meeting. And to be forgiving of technical difficulties. This is a great chance for us all to be practicing patience, I think. Martin, what about you?
No, I think one thing is as a leader, you really have to be, if people are just have these virtual teams and people meet in online meetings, you have to make an effort to really check in with people and see how they're doing. So maybe connect outside of those calls, and don't just expect that everyone's doing okay because they show up with a brave face in the Zoom meeting. So I think with all this remote work, it places an extra responsibility on leaders to keep track of people and connecting with people. So that was a thing that popped into my head.
I'm conscious we're sort of running close to the end of this webinar now, and I just wanted to ask you, do you have a piece of advice, someone who wants to start bringing more compassion into their workplace? What would they do first? What would your advice be? Something quite practical. Jane, how about you first?
There's a wonderful mindful self-compassion book that Martin recommended to me recently, because he could hear how hard I was being on myself. And that simple thing of imagine yourself talking to, as Martin was saying before, imagine yourself talking to a friend who's going through a difficult situation, and now compare that with what you're saying to yourself. And if we can start to listen and be kinder to ourselves, that's the first model that will mean that we shine it out into the world. And because remember, we don't need to change everyone. The evidence shows you change, if 25% of a team or a workplace or a community becomes a little bit more mindful and a little bit more compassionate, that's enough to change the whole culture for everyone. One thought. Martin, over to you.
I would say that so the foundation of all of this is actually having some kind of contemplative practice. And we're talking now, I mean, this is obviously on an individual level, but definitely leaders, if you want to be a good leader, you need some kind of, mindfulness training or meditation, or just some kind of practice where you tune into yourself and you develop your attention skills and you develop your skills of awareness and both introspectively and towards what's going around and on around you. So implementing some kind of contemplative or meditative or mindfulness practice, and then on an organizational level, you can facilitate that by having a space where people can go and sit for a while, and also encouraging, because there's no time for there's no deep work happening anymore. It's all 140 characters and quick and fast and very surface level. So the first thing you need to do is facilitate an opportunity for yourself and others to sometimes just turn the gaze inwards and cultivate those inner qualities, because that's what's going to manifest outwardly in the world, in the workplace, in the family, in the community. So that would be the necessary first thing to have, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I believe, Jane, do you have a final video you wanted to share with us today? Oh, you're on mute.
I saw a question from someone. What's the downside of compassion? Martin. And then I'll play this last 3-minute uplifting video.
Yeah, so the downside of compassion is if it's not paired with wisdom, then we can become, then it can become idiot compassion, and it can be in this whole thing of, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And it's not about becoming a doormat. It's not about being any of those things. You need to have the clarity of making discernments and wise choices. So if compassion isn't paired with that wisdom, then you can get yourself into serious trouble. But if compassion is paired with wisdom, then I don't think there's any downside to it. Like His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, there's no situation where kindness isn't the correct response. There just isn't, as long as it's paired with wisdom. So then just go ahead and cultivate all the compassion you can muster, and you won't find any downsides, I don't think.
Fantastic.
I love that.
This isn't beautiful. What did he say? Be kind whenever possible. It is always possible.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I was trying to say.
So on that line, here's a last 3-minute video to close it. It features the 4 wisdom themes from the 16 guidelines. Who can spot them and recite them at the end? Let's do a test. Angela, thanks for playing this last one.
Anti-racism isn't a personal attack on white people. It's the racist reality we need to change. Anti-racism means making a commitment to respect anger and take a good hard look at others' realities and our own complicity until now. Everything is changing, so anything is possible. Anti-racism means humbly learning the complexity and sophistication of Aboriginal history and supporting their continuing struggle for self-determination. Everything we do and say arises from our thoughts and beliefs.
You can look at systems, whatever they are, and see mostly white people. And you see mostly white people asking people of colour to continue to unpack their stories of racism rather than themselves unpacking why they might be racist, how they discovered their racism, and what they're doing to de-racialize their thinking, to decolonize their own brains, their own minds and way of thinking about things.
Every skillful action makes a better world. Anti-racism means knowing that once we dismantle racist colonial systems, equal rights will free us all. To look after others is to look after ourselves. Anti-racism means practicing compassionate skills for releasing ourselves and others from prejudice.
The antidote to racism is a profound embracing of the diversity of lifeways of the world. We're missing out the most by not embracing diversity on community, on love and care and creativity, everything that is beyond the kind of core of modern systems. So modern societies are so focused on competition, so focused on individualism, on merit, on achievement, on progress, on status. Beyond all those things is the beautiful world of human expression, working together, collaborating, and then doing that with all other life on the planet as well.
We change our minds when we want to change our minds.
Thanks so much for indulging me in those ones, everybody.
I'd like
Wonderful
to
conversation.
I'd like to thank both of our speakers now for everything they've shared with us today, for their insights, their advice, for these wonderful videos, and for the practical tips they've shared and the inspiration. So thank you, Jane. Thank you, Martin, for being with us today. And thank you all for joining and for your questions and for taking time to show up live rather than just watch the recording. I just want to close out now with a quote from His Holiness from his book, Beyond Religion, on compassion, which I found inspiring. Compassion means wanting to do something to relieve the hardships of others. And this desire to help, far from dragging us further into suffering ourselves, actually gives us energy and a sense of purpose and direction and meaning. Since universal compassion involves gradually expanding one's circle of concern until it finally embraces the whole of humanity, it needs to be constantly cultivated. Compassion does not make you weak or passive. It requires, in fact, great fortitude and strength of character. So I'll leave you with that thought, and thank you very much from my heart. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
So
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.